you ever hear a story that sticks with you? Not because it's particularly gory, but because it creeps into the corners of your mind and won't leave. This happened to a friend of mine. Let's call her Sarah. A few years ago, Sarah's grandfather passed away. She was very close to him, and when the funeral was announced, she insisted on going, despite the fact that she hated cemeteries. There's something about that smell, the damp soil, the faint whiff of flowers, and the ever-present chill that always made her skin crawl. It was early November. Rain was falling in sheets that day, drumming against the roof of the funeral home and turning the cemetery paths into slick, muddy trails. Sarah stood under a black umbrella, watching as the small group of relatives huddled together, their faces pale, their eyes red from crying. The sky was a dull, bruised gray, and the wind kept pushing droplets of rain sideways, soaking the hems of their coats. The service went on as usual. Prayers were read, tears were shed, and when it came time to leave, everyone moved toward the grave site. Sarah's heart thumped, not just from grief, but from the unease that always came when she approached a grave. The ground was freshly dug, dark mud clinging to the boots of the mourners. The coffin sat on the lowered platform, glossy and ominous. After the brief committal prayers, everyone stepped back. The funeral director nodded, signaling that it was time to cover the coffin with soil. That's when Sarah noticed it. A whisper. At first, she thought it was just the wind brushing through the trees, but then it became clear. Someone was calling her name, softly, almost pleading. "Sarah!" She froze. No one else seemed to notice. The whispers grew a little louder, more insistent. She turned her head slightly, scanning the gathered relatives, but there was no one near her. Her pulse started racing, and the rational part of her mind screamed, "It's just grief. It's just your imagination." But then it spoke again. "Sarah, come closer." Her hand gripped the umbrella tighter. The voice wasn't cruel or angry. It was familiar, tender, the way her grandfather used to speak when he wanted her to follow him into the garden for a story. She blinked through the rain, and for a moment, her grief overpowered her fear, and she stepped forward. Her shoes sank into the mud as she walked closer to the coffin. The whispers didn't stop. They seemed to come from the freshly dug grave itself, swirling around the edges as if the earth were alive. Sarah's mind was spinning. This can't be real. Then she saw it. A small handprint, moist and muddy, pressed against the inside of the coffin lid. Impossible, because the coffin was sealed. Her stomach churned. She backed up, her umbrella falling sideways in the mud, and screamed, "Sarah, stop!" It was her cousin, Mark. He grabbed her arm, shaking her. "What the hell are you doing? You're scaring everyone." The whispering stopped the instant she was pulled back. The air went silent, the only sound the relentless drizzle hitting the umbrellas. Sarah's legs shook uncontrollably. She looked back at the coffin. Nothing, just mud, rain, and the dark, lifeless wood. Everyone returned to their cars after that, talking quietly, making polite, nervous comments about the weather. But Sarah didn't speak. She just sat in the passenger seat of her mother's car, staring at the cemetery, feeling the weight of something unexplainable pressing down on her chest. That night, she tried to sleep, but she couldn't. Every time her eyes closed, she heard it. Faint, soft, just beyond comprehension. "Sarah, come closer." The next morning, she called her mother, asking if anyone else had noticed anything strange at the funeral. "No," her mother said. "Everything was normal." "Why?" Sarah didn't tell her what she heard. She didn't want anyone to think she was losing it. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something hadn't let go. Something had followed her home from the grave, waiting. Weeks later, she found herself walking past her grandfather's old study. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. And on his desk, where he had kept his watch every day, was a small, muddy handprint. No one was there. Sarah never told anyone about it, but sometimes, when she's alone and the wind rattles the windows, she still hears it. Soft, gentle, calling her name. And she knows, somehow, it's waiting for her. I want to tell you about something that happened to a friend of mine. Let's call him Jason. He wasn't superstitious, never believed in ghosts or anything like that. But what happened to him at his uncle's funeral changed that forever. It was a cold December morning. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, and a bitter wind swept across the cemetery. Jason had always hated funerals, but he felt he had to be there. His uncle had passed unexpectedly, and the whole family was gathered, dressed in black, faces tight with grief. The coffin sat on the lowered platform, polished and dark against the pale, wet soil. As the ceremony started, rain began, light at first, then heavier, drumming on umbrellas and slicking the ground. The minister's words were almost drowned out by the storm, but the family barely noticed. The wind whistled through the bare trees, making them groan, and the muddy paths squelched beneath the feet of the mourners. A cold mist clung to the cemetery, swirling around the headstones and giving the whole place a shadowy, unreal quality. After the prayers, it was time to lower the coffin. Jason had a front row spot, standing just a few feet away. That's when he noticed something strange. The coffin, it seemed to wobble. At first, he thought it was the straps being uneven or the pallbearers losing balance, but then he saw it again, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, a tilt, a shift. "Jason, are you okay?" his cousin whispered, eyes wide. Jason nodded, trying not to panic. Maybe it was just his imagination. But then came the sound, a soft thump, like someone knocking from inside the coffin. He froze. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead, and the wind tugged at his coat. The sound came again. Thump, thump, like someone inside was struggling to get out. Jason leaned closer, heart hammering. He could see the coffin lid moving slightly with each thump. It was impossible, but he knew what he saw. "Mark, did you feel that?" he whispered, grabbing his cousin's arm. Mark shook his head nervously. "It's just the straps," he said. But even as he spoke, the coffin tilted more noticeably. No one else seemed to notice. The coffin lid jerked violently once, twice, as though something inside was struggling desperately. Then came a voice, a low, raspy whisper. Not loud, barely audible over the rain, but unmistakable. "Jason." He stumbled backward, eyes wide. His uncle's voice, faint but clear. "Jason, let me out." Panic set in. His stomach dropped, and his hands shook uncontrollably. The coffin was lowered fully, and the moment the earth covered the sides, the whispers and thumping stopped. Silence fell, except for the storm. The family dispersed quickly, shaken by the weather. Jason didn't speak that day. He drove home in silence, hands trembling on the wheel, his mind replaying what he had just witnessed. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the coffin lid rocking and imagined that raspy voice calling his name. The thought of it made his skin crawl even weeks later. That night, he tried to sleep, but the memory haunted him. Around midnight, he heard it again, not in the cemetery, but at his apartment. A soft knock from the living room, then another. Jason tiptoed toward the sound, flashlight in hand. On the floor was a box, a simple wooden box he had never seen before. Inside, nothing, but on the lid, in condensation, was a single word. "Jason." He slammed the box shut, threw it in the corner, and covered it with a blanket. But every night after that, the knocking returned, always gentle, deliberate, and accompanied by that low, pleading whisper. Jason eventually moved apartments, trying to escape it, but the feeling of being watched never left him. He still swears he can feel something trying to reach him, just like it had that rainy day in the cemetery. He told me once, voice barely above a whisper, "I can't explain it. I know he's not resting. And somehow, he's looking for me." Even now, Jason keeps a nightlight on. He says it's not really about fear of the dark, it's about keeping whatever it is at bay. But sometimes, when the wind rattles the windows and the rain pounds against the roof, he swears he hears it. Thump, thump, and then a voice. "Jason, come closer. I need to tell you about something that happened to a distant cousin of mine. Let's call him Daniel. He was quiet, level-headed, never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural. But one funeral he attended completely shattered that calm. It was late October, the kind of day when the sky hangs low and gray, and the wind whistles through the trees like it's carrying secrets. Daniel's aunt had passed away suddenly. The family was holding the funeral in an old, small-town chapel on the edge of a forest. The wooden pews creaked under the weight of mourners, and the smell of damp leaves and old wood mixed with the faint perfume of lilies. A thin layer of mist clung to the stained glass windows, making the light inside pale and uneven, and the shadows in the corners seemed darker, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The service began as usual. The priest spoke softly, prayers were recited, and people whispered among themselves. But Daniel noticed something strange almost immediately. Every time he looked at the coffin, it seemed wrong. Not the way it looked, but the way it felt, as if it were alive, somehow aware of the room around it, as though the air near it pulsed differently. He tried to shake it off. Funerals always made him uneasy. When it was time to lower the coffin into the ground, a sudden chill swept through the chapel. The doors had been left slightly open, and the wind carried the sound of dry leaves rustling like whispers. Daniel stood near the front, watching as the pallbearers carefully moved the coffin, and then he heard it, a faint creak, the sound of a nail or hinge moving. He blinked. The coffin lid shifted slightly, as if something inside had shifted its weight. Daniel leaned closer, heart pounding. No one else seemed to notice. A low scratching sound came from the inside of the coffin, soft at first, then more urgent. His pulse raced. He froze. Rain from outside tapped against the roof like impatient fingers. The scratching grew louder, more deliberate. It was accompanied by something else, a faint, almost pleading whisper. "Help me." Daniel staggered back, nearly tripping over the carpet. He could have sworn the coffin lid was moving on its own. A shadow seemed to flicker beneath it, though no one else saw it. "Did you hear that?" he whispered to the person next to him. "Daniel, it's just the wind," someone muttered, clearly annoyed. But it wasn't the wind. Daniel knew it wasn't. The pallbearers continued, lowering the coffin into the grave outside. As the soil began to cover the edges, the scratching and whispers became frantic. Daniel's knees weakened. He could hear it clearly now. "Don't leave me. Don't leave me." Then it stopped. The soil covered the coffin completely, and everything went silent. The mourners left, shaking hands and murmuring polite words. But Daniel couldn't move. He stood frozen, staring at the freshly covered grave, a deep sense of wrongness settling over him. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept imagining the whispers, the scratching, the pleading voice. Around 2 a.m., there was a knock at his door. He thought it was a neighbor at first, but when he opened it, no one was there. Only a faint, wet smear on the doorstep, like mud from a freshly dug grave. Weeks passed. Daniel noticed shadows moving in the corner of his vision, always near doors or windows. Sometimes, late at night, he could hear it, soft scratching, low whispering, always saying the same thing. "Don't leave me, don't leave me." Even during the day, when he was alone, he felt eyes on him, an invisible weight pressing down on his chest. He tried talking to family members about it, but they all insisted it was grief, nerves, or imagination. Daniel eventually moved to another city, hoping to escape whatever had followed him, but he never truly felt free. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the lid of that coffin shift ever so slightly. He could almost hear that pleading whisper, soft but urgent, curling around him in the quiet moments. And he knows, deep down, that day in the chapel, his aunt didn't want to be buried. Something had held on to the world of the living, something that didn't accept death, something that wanted to stay among us. And maybe she never will.